What if the chaos in your life wasn't just coincidence? What if the shadows you ignore, the cluttered corners, the broken keepsakes, the whispers in the silence, held more power than you ever imagined? Clara's life was unraveling before her eyes, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something more sinister was lurking in the mess. Was her suffering merely bad luck, or was there a deeper force feeding on her despair? When Clara meets Evelyn Sen, a mysterious woman with unsettling insights, Clara learns a chilling truth. Sometimes what haunts you isn't just in your mind, it's in the very space around you. But what was haunting Clara's home, and why did it seem to grow stronger with each passing night? Clara Rivers had always been ambitious, driven by dreams of success in a field she loved. But recently, nothing seemed to go right. Clients backed out, her health declined, and a suffocating weight pressed down on her every day. As the whispers in her apartment grew louder, Clara felt trapped in an invisible grip, her thoughts clouded by doubt and fear. Could Evelyn's cryptic words hold the key to breaking free? Or was Clara's entire reality about to unravel as she faced the chilling echoes hiding within her walls? Clara often wondered, why does misfortune cling to me like a shadow? She had done everything right, or so she thought. Yet, whispers in her cluttered apartment only grew louder, mingling with her thoughts and doubts. The bills piled up and the projects fell apart. Was this just life being unfair, or was something feeding on her despair? Clara felt an uneasy presence in every corner, like a cold breath on her neck, watching her struggle. But who or what was it? Evelyn Sen's words echoed, "Your home is a mirror of your mind." Clara brushed off the notion at first. How could scattered papers and dusty memories affect her fate? The mentor's voice lingered in Clara's head, weaving curiosity with skepticism. Is there truly a connection between space and spirit? Each night, the whispering intensified, and shadows lengthened in her small studio apartment. She began to question if her suffering had a deeper source, one hiding within her neglected walls. The nights brought Clara no relief. She would wake with the unsettling sense of being observed. She avoided mirrors, fearing they might reflect more than just her worn-out face. What is it about darkness that awakens our deepest fears? Clara's old friend Lena suggested therapy, or even a vacation, but Clara couldn't escape the feeling that this was a problem rooted in her space. Something seemed tethered to the objects she couldn't let go of, relics of her past failures. One afternoon, Clara found an old card Lena had given her, Evelyn Sen's contact. Clara felt ridiculous dialing the number, but what did she have to lose? When Evelyn arrived, the air felt heavier. Back in her apartment, Lena tried to find solace, but the shadows seemed darker, the air heavier. She stood in the middle of her living room, overwhelmed by a sense of being surrounded by something she couldn't see, a presence that seemed to feed on her fear and self-doubt. Lena's breaths came quick and shallow. Why do I feel so cursed? She thought, her mind racing. It was in this moment of isolation and despair that she decided to escape to the garden outside, hoping the fresh air would clear her mind. The garden outside Lena's apartment building was a small, quiet refuge, a patch of green surrounded by tall brick walls. Lena often came here to escape the weight of her thoughts, but tonight, even the garden felt suffocating. She sat on a worn stone bench, trying to steady her breath, feeling the presence of invisible eyes watching her even in the open air. Am I losing my mind? She wondered, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the hem of her jacket. As she sat there, lost in her spiraling thoughts, an elderly woman emerged from the shadows of the garden. It was Mrs. Kyoko Hara, Lena's reclusive neighbor. Mrs. Hara moved gracefully, her eyes sharp and attentive. Lena often saw her tending to the small flower beds, but they had never spoken more than a few pleasantries. Tonight, however, Mrs. Hara seemed to sense Lena's distress. She approached quietly, her presence both comforting and unsettling in the heavy night air. "You look troubled, dear," Mrs. Hara said softly, her voice like the gentle rustle of leaves. Lena looked up, surprised by the woman's sudden appearance. For a moment, Lena considered brushing her off with a forced smile, but something about Mrs. Hara's piercing gaze compelled her to speak. "It's nothing," Lena muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. But the words felt hollow, even to her own ears. Mrs. Hara didn't respond immediately, just waited with an almost unnerving patience. "Sometimes we carry burdens we can't see," Mrs. Hara said, her voice steady. Lena's eyes widened, a chill running down her spine. How could she know? Mrs. Hara continued, "Negative energy can cling to us like shadows, especially when we let envy and doubt enter our lives." Lena felt a mix of fear and curiosity. How could this old woman possibly understand what she was going through? But there was something about Mrs. Hara's calm demeanor that made Lena want to listen. "Do you believe in the power of intention?" Mrs. Hara asked, her eyes never leaving Lena's. Lena hesitated, unsure of what to say. Wasn't this just another meaningless platitude? I don't know, Lena admitted, her voice tinged with doubt. Mrs. Hara smiled knowingly. Sometimes we need more than just words to shield ourselves from negativity, she said, reaching into the pocket of her simple cardigan and pulling out a small, smooth stone. This, she explained, can act as a shield if you give it the right intention. Lena stared at the stone, a wave of skepticism washing over her. A stone? She thought, unable to hide her disbelief. But Mrs. Hara's eyes were unwavering, her expression serious. It's not the stone itself, she explained, but the purpose you attach to it. You must be clear in your intention to protect yourself. Lena felt an unexpected flutter of hope amidst her doubt. Could something so simple really work? The darkness of the garden seemed to press in on her, and for a moment, Lena considered turning away. But she stayed, compelled by something she couldn't name, a whisper of faith that perhaps, just maybe, this could be the answer she was searching for. Lena followed Mrs. Hara through the winding garden paths until they reached a secluded spot beneath a large oak tree. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, casting shadows that seemed to dance and shift in the breeze. Lena's heart was still heavy with doubt, but Mrs. Hara's presence had a grounding effect. Why do I feel drawn to her words? Lena wondered, unable to shake the sense that she was on the verge of something significant. Mrs. Hara turned to face Lena, holding the small stone in her palm. It was a simple, smooth piece of obsidian, dark as midnight and cool to the touch. This stone is not magical, Mrs. Hara began, her voice gentle yet firm, but it can hold the power you give it. Lena raised an eyebrow, her skepticism showing. Mrs. Hara smiled, as if sensing Lena's doubt. Think of it as an anchor, she continued, a way to channel your intentions into something tangible. Lena felt a flicker of curiosity beneath her layers of uncertainty. So what do I do with it? She asked, her voice betraying both hope and fear. Mrs. Hara placed the stone in Lena's hand, her fingers lingering for a moment. First, you must clear your mind, she said softly. Set aside your worries and focus on what you want the stone to represent. Protection, clarity, peace. Lena closed her eyes, struggling to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Imagine a light surrounding you, Mrs. Hara continued, her tone soothing. Feel it pushing away the shadows, the negativity. Visualize this light being absorbed into the stone, creating a barrier between you and anything that seeks to harm your spirit. Lena's fingers tightened around the stone, her breathing slowing as she tried to focus. Can something like this really help? She wondered, but a part of her wanted to believe. She imagined the stone glowing softly, holding within it a sense of calm she desperately craved. When Lena opened her eyes, she felt strangely lighter, as if a weight had been lifted ever so slightly. Mrs. Hara studied her with a quiet intensity. This is only the beginning, the old woman said. Carry this stone with you as a reminder of your intention. When the negativity tries to invade your thoughts, touch the stone and reaffirm your purpose. Lena nodded, still unsure if this ritual would change anything, but something inside her whispered that it was worth trying. What do I have to lose? She thought as she slipped the stone into her pocket. Lena spent the next few days carrying the stone with her everywhere, at work, at home, and even during her restless nights. She wasn't entirely sure why, but it gave her a small sense of comfort in moments when the pressure seemed too much to bear. Each time a negative thought or envious glance from a coworker rattled her confidence, Lena would reach into her pocket and touch the stone, as if grounding herself in the intention she had set with Mrs. Hara's guidance. But despite her cautious hope, the negativity didn't immediately disappear. Amara's subtle jabs at work still stung, and Mr. Holloway's passive-aggressive critiques were as relentless as ever. Lena's doubts crept in like shadows, whispering that maybe all of this was pointless, that a simple object couldn't shield her from the weight of envy and judgment. Why did I think this would help? She thought, feeling the oppressive presence of her insecurities lurking just beneath the surface. One night, after a particularly difficult day, Lena sat alone in her apartment, staring at the stone on her coffee table. She couldn't help but feel foolish, clinging to an object that seemed so insignificant in the face of her problems. It's just a rock, she thought bitterly, shaking her head. But then Mrs. Hara's words echoed in her mind. It's not the stone itself, it's your intention. Lena felt a spark of defiance flare within her doubt. Maybe I haven't really committed to this, she realized. Taking a deep breath, Lena lit a small candle and placed the stone beside it. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on what she wanted to let go of. Envy, self-doubt, fear. Lena visualized the stone absorbing these shadows and transforming them into something lighter, something she could carry without feeling weighed down. She whispered a quiet affirmation to herself. I am protected. I am in control of my energy. The words felt awkward at first, but with each repetition, Lena felt her conviction growing. As the candle's flame flickered gently, Lena felt a shift within her. It wasn't a dramatic change, but more like the first breath of fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room. She opened her eyes and watched the shadows on the walls dance in the candlelight. Maybe it's not about the stone at all, she thought, her fingers brushing its smooth surface. Maybe it's about believing that I can protect myself from the negativity around me. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt a glimmer of hope. Lena carried the stone in her pocket like a secret, a quiet reminder of the intention she had set. But despite her efforts, the negativity at work didn't seem to let up. Amara's veiled jabs became sharper, and Lena found herself shrinking under her boss, Mr. Holloway's relentless critiques. Every meeting felt like a test she was destined to fail. The whispers in her mind grew louder, and Lena could almost feel the presence of a shadow hovering just out of sight, feeding off her insecurities. One day, during a heated meeting, Lena made a small mistake in her report. Amara seized the opportunity, subtly highlighting Lena's error with a smile that barely masked her satisfaction. Mr. Holloway didn't miss a beat, launching into a passive-aggressive critique that left Lena reeling. You need to pay more attention to details, he said, his voice laced with condescension. Lena felt the weight of every judging stare from her colleagues, her face burning with embarrassment. Why can't I ever get it right? She thought, panic rising. As the meeting dragged on, Lena felt the oppressive presence of the shadow more intensely than ever. Her heart raced, and her breath felt shallow, as if the walls were closing in. Lena slipped her hand into her pocket, gripping the stone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Focus, she told herself, trying to hold on to Mrs. Hara's teachings. But the voices in her mind, Amara's criticisms, Mr. Holloway's dismissals, Jessica's constant reminders of her failures, merged into a deafening chorus of doubt. That evening, Lena stayed late at the office, trying to fix her report and salvage some sense of control. The building was nearly empty, the silence heavy and unsettling. Lena felt the presence of the shadow lurking just beyond the edges of her vision, its weight pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't escape the feeling that it was watching, waiting for her to break. Is this really all in my head? She wondered, a shiver running down her spine. Lena shook her head, trying to dispel the creeping dread. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, Lena couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. The negativity felt like a dark fog, thickening around her with every passing minute. Lena took a deep breath, forcing herself to close her eyes and visualize the stone in her hand as a shield against the darkness. She repeated her silent affirmation, I am protected. I am in control of my energy. The words felt fragile against the weight of her doubt, but Lena clung to them like a lifeline. Lena found herself alone in the office, long after everyone else had gone home. The quiet was almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the building settling. She stared at her computer screen, but the words blurred together, her mind too tangled with fear and doubt to make sense of them. What's the point? She thought bitterly, feeling the familiar sting of failure. Why do I keep trying? Lena felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to break. The weight of the shadow was almost unbearable now, a presence that seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. Lena could feel it hovering behind her, feeding off her insecurities and amplifying every negative thought. She could almost hear it whispering in the silence, reminding her of every mistake, every failure. It's not real, Lena tried to tell herself, but the doubt in her mind was deafening. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her hands trembled as she reached for the stone in her pocket. What if this doesn't work? The thought cut through her like a blade, sharp and cold. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, feeling the tears slip down her cheeks. She couldn't let the shadow win, but the fear was overwhelming, pressing down on her chest like a weight she couldn't lift. Why does this feel so real? She wondered, her heart racing. Lena took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus on Mrs. Hara's words. It's not the object, it's your intention. Lena repeated the words silently, trying to drown out the voices of doubt. In that moment, Lena felt a spark of defiance flare within her. She opened her eyes, staring into the darkness that seemed to close in around her. I won't let this control me, she thought fiercely, her fingers tightening around the stone. Lena closed her eyes again, visualizing the negativity dissolving away, replaced by a warm, protective light. She focused on her breathing, on the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, and repeated her affirmation with a newfound conviction. I am protected. I am in control of my energy. Slowly, the weight on Lena's chest began to lift, the darkness receding like a tide. The whispers in her mind grew quieter, their power fading as Lena held on to her intention. When she opened her eyes, the office was still, the air feeling lighter than it had in days. Lena let out a shaky breath, feeling a cautious sense of relief. Maybe this isn't just about the stone, she realized, her fingers brushing its smooth surface. Maybe it's about believing in my own strength. For the first time, Lena felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps she wasn't as powerless as she had feared. In the days that followed, Lena began to notice subtle changes. The oppressive weight she used to feel in the office was no longer as heavy. It wasn't that Amara's remarks stopped or that Mr. Holloway suddenly became more supportive, but Lena found herself less affected by their words. Each time Amara tried to undermine her or Mr. Holloway critiqued her work, Lena would quietly reach into her pocket, feel the smooth stone, and take a deep breath. I am protected, she would think, her thoughts clearer and more focused. Mrs. Hara stopped by the garden one evening while Lena was sitting on her usual bench. Lena had a faint smile on her face as she watched the leaves rustle in the wind, the cool evening air filling her lungs. You look lighter, Mrs. Hara said, her voice breaking the comfortable silence. Lena looked up, meeting the older woman's kind eyes. I think I'm starting to understand, Lena replied, her voice steady. Mrs. Hara nodded, as if she had been expecting this change all along. Remember, Mrs. Hara said softly, the object is just a guide. The true power lies within you. Lena let the words sink in, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't the stone that was protecting her, it was her own intention and belief in her ability to control her energy. The stone was a reminder, a symbol of the shift that had occurred within her. Lena felt a surge of gratitude towards Mrs. Hara, who had shown her a path out of the darkness. As the days passed, Lena's confidence grew. The negativity that once seemed overwhelming now felt like distant echoes, no longer able to control her. At work, Lena noticed that she was more assertive in meetings, speaking up with a clear voice and standing by her ideas. Amara's comments still stung, but they no longer left deep wounds. Lena had learned to set boundaries, not just in her interactions with others, but within her own mind. She wasn't allowing negativity to take root in her thoughts anymore. At home, Lena's apartment felt different too. The air seemed lighter, the shadows less menacing. Lena made small changes, opening the windows more often, clearing out old clutter, and bringing in a few plants to brighten the space. She was transforming not just her environment, but her mindset. Lena no longer felt like a prisoner in her own life. She was reclaiming her power, one intention at a time. Lena's transformation wasn't sudden. It was a quiet, steady shift that continued to deepen with each passing day. She carried the stone not as a shield, but as a symbol of her journey and growth. It reminded her of the strength she had found within herself, the resilience she had cultivated despite the shadows that once surrounded her. Lena no longer saw herself as a victim of negativity. She saw herself as someone who could rise above it, who could choose how to respond to the world around her. One morning, as Lena walked into the office, she noticed something different. It wasn't the environment that had changed, it was her perspective. The critical looks, the judgmental whispers, the subtle dismissals, they were all still there, but they no longer held the same power over her. Lena felt a sense of peace, a lightness in her step that hadn't been there before. Maybe it's not about blocking negativity, she realized, but about strengthening my own light. In a team meeting later that day, Mr. Holloway began to critique Lena's latest project, but she didn't flinch. Lena listened calmly, acknowledging his points without internalizing them. When Amara tried to slip in a subtle dig, Lena met her gaze with quiet confidence. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She knew her worth. The shadow that once loomed over her felt distant, its whispers growing fainter as Lena embraced her newfound strength. After the meeting, Jessica approached Lena with her usual air of feigned concern. I saw Mr. Holloway was pretty hard on you in there, she said, her tone dripping with false empathy. Lena felt the familiar tug of resentment, but instead of letting it fester, she let it go. I'm fine, Jessica, Lena replied, her voice steady. Really? Jessica blinked, taken aback by Lena's calm response. For the first time, Lena saw Jessica for what she truly was, not a threat, but someone struggling with her own insecurities. That evening, as Lena sat in her apartment, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She pulled the stone from her pocket, turning it over in her hand. It's not just about protection, she thought. It's about belief. Belief in my own strength, in my ability to create peace within myself. Lena placed the stone on a small table by her window, letting the moonlight bathe it in a soft glow. She no longer needed to carry it with her. It had served its purpose. Lena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath and whispering a quiet affirmation. I am light. I am strong. She opened her eyes, feeling a gentle breeze drift through the open window. For the first time in a long while, Lena felt truly free. Free from the shadows, from the doubts, and from the fear that once held her back. She smiled, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them with courage and clarity. After following Lena's journey, ask yourself, what negativity are you holding on to that drains your confidence or feeds your doubts? Share in the comments one step you're willing to take to reclaim your inner peace and protect your energy. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories that help you rise above life's challenges.